Online radio coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And of course, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Everybody, welcome to the show. I hope you had a good weekend. Now, you might be noticing that there's a slightly different format to this episode. And for the last several weeks on Black Box Online Radio, I've been talking to you about a new Zodiac killer suspect named L.D. Hill. And I'm joined by Melissa Tappa, who is going to walk us through her explorations into her Zodiac suspect, Loring Dale Hill, commonly known as L.D. Hill. And as far as I can tell, Melissa, and as well as her research partner, Thornton Daniel Jeffrey, are really the first individuals anywhere to have brought this suspect forward. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. But Melissa, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you, Ned? Thanks for having me.
All is well, yes. And I just found out where you're coming from in the Midwest. I'm actually in the Philippines right now, far from West Virginia, and I'm hoping that the internet connection is going to move strongly here. And as far as this goes, I want to turn it over to you and ask, can you tell us more about your Zodiac killer suspect, Loring Dale Hill?
Well, sure. I would say about 2 years ago, I received just a tip. I wasn't really part of, the expert community for the Zodiac Killer. I remember being a child and, snippets would come up in the news in the 80s and the 90s as, like America's Most Wanted would review the case and revisit it. But I was never really a part of it. I had kind of an interest in forensic psychology because my degree is in psychology and sociology. But I did not decide to pursue that in my career, which is interesting because 2 years ago, out of nowhere, I had a close friend confided me about a secret that, his family member had confided in him with, and that was that this person, part of his family was the Zodiac Killer or suspected to be the Zodiac Killer. And I've known this friend for about 25 years. Pretty close, with the family. I never knew that there was any type of a connection to California because, we're originally from Chicago area. And I think I had remembered that the person he had spoke of was from Ohio. So I started asking questions. Well, how do you know? And at first, the Golden State Killer had come to mind. And I'm like, well, didn't they catch him? And he said, no, they haven't caught him yet. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. That was the other killer, the Golden State Killer. And I started asking questions. Well, how does this person know? And he said, well, she lived there in the Bay Area during the times of the killings. And I said, well, I had no idea. This is news to me. Are you sure? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, why did the killings stop? Because I could remember there was a gap. And he said, well, because he left California and eventually went back to Ohio. And he said, he was in the Navy, they traveled everywhere, and he was there on assignment. And then shockingly, he swore me to secrecy, and he's like, just don't say anything. I'm like, okay. But the conversation ended. And I also have an interest in genealogy. I mean, I love family history, family trees. I mean, I will research well into the night. I'm one of those individuals where the light is still on in the middle of the night and I'm out there, trying to figure out my family tree. And so I have, ancestry.com subscription. So I thought, well, you know what? I know her name. I don't know her father's name, who she suspects is the Zodiac Killer. So I started searching for her name and I found her yearbook picture from in Alameda, her high school yearbook picture. So I thought, wow, okay, well, this is true. Because at first, I'm thinking she's crazy. And I thought, well, okay, well, let me build her family tree and figure out who her father is. Because I didn't have a name. I had nothing else to go on. So, and there wasn't really much on Ancestry.com about the family at all. So it took a lot of digging. I finally wrote down, I found his name. I found in Find a Grave his gravestone, which had confirmed that, yes, he was in the Navy. It had his occupation on the gravestone. It had, the year he was born and died. And then I thought, well, I'll just keep looking into this until I find information that tells me, it might not be him. So I just said, well, again, needle in a haystack, probably is not him. And so I started watching the movie, and I started looking at documentaries, YouTube videos, and re-immersing myself in the case. And from there, I wrote down the Z13 cipher, and I started to just take notes about wing walker boots and all the different clues. And as I continued to research, I reached out to my friend and I said, hey, do you have any handwriting analysis, any pictures? And so he sent me 4 pictures that he obtained, one of which had his handwriting on it. And when I saw the handwriting in the pictures, I thought, okay, it's not telling me it's not him, so I'm going to keep looking. And I thought to myself, well, let me just plug his name into the Z13. And it fit the 13 characters. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And then when I was back on Ancestry.com, I found a military record that showed his enlistment during the time of the murders from, 1968 till 1974, I think is what the record said. And then that's when it really hit me. Like, this is right exactly during the time of the murders. So I started to just continue to collect information about Loring D. Hill and see if I could figure out whether or not there was anything else that would rule him out. I looked on newspapers.com, searched his hometown, and I figured out his mother was the local journalist and correspondent for their feeder newspaper out of Marysville, Ohio. And she would, back then in the 60s and 70s, there was a personals section. So they would always talk about all the social activities going on. And so she would always talk about when her sons were home from the military or home from vacation, or who visited who at Thanksgiving. And I started to just document and save every single reference to Loring D. Hill that I could find in newspapers.com. And then I went and cataloged the dates, the times of when he was in Ohio, when he went back to California, when he went back to Texas, because he was stationed in Texas before he went to California. And from there, it was striking the similarities and the consistency between where he was and where he wasn't. And when I found an article that he was stationed on the USS Enterprise, that hit me like, well, that explained when I did the dates of when, the Faraday, the 1968 murder happened on December 20th. The ship leaves the port in San Francisco, I believe it was January 6th. And then I started reading that he was a survivor in a fire. His mother had reported that. He had reported himself safe. And then when I saw, the July 2nd return of the Enterprise, and then on July 4th, the Darlene Ferrin murder, I just was like kind of dumbfounded and thought, well, that it can explain the gap of why. And everybody asked that question. Why did he kill and then wait 6 or 7 months to kill again? And that, to me, seems to be the best answer to that question I think I've ever heard. So I'll just stop and pause there for any other questions. But that's really how this all got started.
And sure, yes. And for some background information, just in case this is the first episode you've ever clicked on from the channel, we're talking about the timeline of the Zodiac killer. And the first crime occurred on December 20th of 1968. And as Melissa said, her suspect was in California at the time, then leaves on January 6th, I think you just said, on the USS Enterprise. And he's deployed during the entirety of the winter and the spring, the remainder of the winter and the entirety of the spring, returning on July 2nd of 1969. And then the Zodiac killer committed his second crime on July 4th of 1969. So you're saying that your suspect's completely in the Bay Area. And that's the stuff that I've shared in some previous Zodiac Monday episodes, just in case that this is the first one somebody's heard. And of course, I'm just going to remind everybody, I'm talking with Melissa Tappa, and she is the webmaster of ZodiacKillerBomb.com. That's one thing we didn't say in the introduction. And if you would like to visit her website, I invite you to do so. You can also go through some of the links here in the description box, including the one for buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anyone who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And it's a great way to support some of these efforts so we can have more guests on the show and try some new formats with BBOR. But in addition to running your website, ZodiacKillerBot.com, you also have a Facebook group, correct?
Yeah, it's called Zodiac Killer and Me Facebook group. And it is unique from other groups, where other groups are really general and they're great, you know, but this one was really just designed to really focus on, you know, updates on this particular suspect versus just the case as a whole. I mean, we share, you know, as much as we can, obviously, on what we've heard. But yeah, this one is really dedicated to going through step by step this suspect and sharing the information we found, getting feedback, you know, including the community, because, you know, I wouldn't be where I am right now in terms of this investigation if it wasn't for, obviously, like, you know, Butterfield and all the other ones that have led the way. You know, zodiacciphers.com was extremely helpful there. I mean, I could probably go through a huge list, and I've really taken into account, you know, almost everything that everybody's contributed. And obviously we have to make, you know, take everything with a grain of salt, because we're looking at circumstantial evidence, we're looking at clues, you know, nobody really knows, but I can at least say that I think it does take a village to really solve this case. I mean, and even with Graysmith writing the book, you know, at least he had a book that he said, you know what, I wrote this just in case if somebody knows him out there, that they can recognize who he is. It's not that he was perfect. You know, I have a ton of notes. Like his book, I kind of tore apart, and I have tons of pages of, you know, where he was off, you know, like his timeline was inaccurate, but also similarities like leather jacket, black rim glasses, car, well dressed. You know, like, you know, his theory about the character in the Z13 that looks like a circle with an 8, like an 8 ball. My theory is that it's a circle with an H, but he thinks it comes from the Taurus sign. You know, obviously I disagree with Graysmith on that. You know, it could be an airplane tire. Like, we don't know, but I think it's still good to have healthy conversations, to share what our opinions are, share our research, and come together to try and close this case after 54, 55 years.
Okay, so with Loringdale Hill, we've talked about the Lake Herman Road murders. We've talked about the USS Enterprise, and we've talked about the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Now we're in the summer of 1969, and this becomes the birth of Zodiac activity with the Zodiac killer's name. On July 31st, the Zodiac killer would write his first letter, which is actually one letter that was printed 3 times and mailed with 3 portions of a cipher to 3 different newspapers, the San Francisco Examiner, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. But as I understand, you have some additional information about the activities and whereabouts of Loringdale Hill for the summer of 1969. Would you like to continue?
Absolutely. Yes. And so, like we had mentioned, you know, the murder of Darlene Farron happened on July 4th. The ciphers and the 408 cipher and the letters were mailed July 31st, 1969. And again, I want to say that L.D. Hill was 35 years old at this time. August 3rd, I did include the Furlong and Snoozy activity just in case, because I just wanted everything out there to see if there was anything that could point to him or away from him. So the Snoozy murders took place August 3rd in Santa Clara County. And then the Zodiac follows up with a letter on August 4th, the day after. And then my activity just on L.D. Hill as an individual is that he was in Ohio between August 8th and August 22nd of 1969. This is according to the Marysville Journal newspaper, reported by his mother, Lena M. Hill, on August 28th, 1969. And I did obtain his military records, and I can confirm he did request leave for 30 days during that. I believe it was August or September, that I do have portions of his leave record to, again, corroborate that. He was still in Ohio by August 28th, and then Lena mentions when he returns back to Alameda. So she says she reports on September 8th that he returns back to Alameda for 4 more years of enlistment. And that's when we have the Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell event, you know, attack on Lake Berryessa, which was September 27th, 1969. And then we have Paul Stein October 11th. And then the Zodiac, you know, picks up the persona with the letter on October 13th. And he continues this correspondence from the Zodiac just continues like rapid fire. You don't have this 6-month break between victims and between his activity. And what struck me was that the fire in the USS Enterprise took the USS Enterprise out of commission in the Vietnam War, and it was out being, revamped, refueled for, I think it was a good 18 months to almost a year, at least until like early 1970, 71. It was 71. And so I feel like, okay, LD Hill is now landlocked. He isn't out on sea anymore. He did re-enlist. He's still a member of the VAQ 132 Squadron, which is a recent discovery of mine. And I feel like that's a huge and strong component of this case to show that potentially your 8 out of 10 rating is pretty good. Obviously, we don't have a 10, but this is someone that we should take seriously and I think look into. And whether he's ruled out and not the Zodiac, that's fine. But this is worth our time and investigating and looking a bit closer.
Okay, now wait a second, though, because we're talking about the timeline, and you are very keen to know that he left the Bay Area on August 8th of 1969, and the Zodiac Killer mailed an additional letter on August 4th of 1969, so I believe you mean that he was in the Bay Area for the mailing of that Zodiac letter. I mean,
Yes.
No matter who mailed that, he was present. But how exactly did you mean that his mother confirmed in a newspaper that he was out of the Bay Area from August 8th until September? What date in September did he return?
He had to report back to duty September 8th.
How exactly was that shared in the newspaper? I mean, that's an odd thing to document, that my son is out of the Bay Area from August 8th to September.
Well, she says, Loring visits here. I think I have the right. So basically, she says, Mr. and Mrs. Loring Hill and family, Alameda Caliph, are visiting. Mrs. Lena Hill and other relatives and friends. Mr. Hill recently returned on the USS Enterprise from a Vietnam cruise. He will report September 8th for reenlistment in the Navy for 4 years, completing 20 years. Just part of the Yeah.
So it's like it does definitively state that he left on August 8th and would return on September 8th.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But that begs a question, though. I mean, now, feel free to speculate, hypothesize, give me anything. He returns on September 8th, but the Zodiac doesn't commit a crime until September 27th. That's kind of a bigger time gap than what you said previously about the Enterprise arriving on July 2nd, and 2 days later, it's like he can't even wait to commit the next crime. But now there's a rather large time gap comparatively. That's about 2 weeks, right? I mean, yeah, 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
2.5.
Well, and here's where he's got the costume. He's got, the elaborate, I think he, well planned out. Even if his victims were random, I think it was still a planned out attack, an event. So whether he was using the 2 weeks to plan that out, that I don't know. I mean, I can certainly look closer at his military records if, there was, usually when they return to service too, there's obviously medical exams and training and things like that. But personally, I feel like, and again, I can't prove it, but perhaps those 2 weeks he was preparing for that attack. I don't think he was well planned in advance, but I do think he would have taken at least 2 weeks, especially in the Shepherd and the Hartnell attack. And really the Stein one too, to be honest.
Yeah, that was my next question. So after the Lake Berryessa stabbing, the Zodiac Killer murders Paul Stein. And what is your analysis of that particular crime? How do you think that went down? And I'm not asking you to do anything psychic, but kind of get into Loring Dale Hill's mind. What do you think would be all the reasons for altering the Zodiac's complete MO? Instead of being the serial killer that targets couples in secluded areas, he's going to murder a man in Presidio Heights in California, a taxi driver, a lone male, and walk away, knowing fully well that he could be witnessed by other people. And he was witnessed by multiple individuals. He was almost caught by the police, and the only thing that allegedly possibly saved him was there was an APB, an all points bulletin, that went out to be on the lookout for a black man, and then the white man walked right past officers Falcon Zelms, and the details of that encounter are still somewhat of a mystery even to this day. But what is your analysis of the Stein murder?
Yeah, I mean, I've taken some time to think about the Stein murder. And I will say the last maybe 6 months or so, some information has come out like from the family that potentially might explain why that MO changed from, teenagers in lovers lanes, in cars, near water, all of that, versus a random cab driver in a well-populated urban area. Um, that I can't really talk about too much to get into detail. It is convincing, but I can't really release it publicly because again, it's unconfirmed. It's really word of mouth. And with this case, I'm really trying to focus on what are, even if it's like circumstantial evidence, can I document that it occurred, right? And I can't quite document the story I was given yet about why I feel like he changed this MO. It makes sense if it's true. And maybe that, hopefully we'll somehow be able to figure that out. But what I can say is that pertaining to LD Hill, his fingerprints are kind of, and I'm talking, not hypothetically, but his fingerprints, in air quotes, are all over this case when we look at, the subsequent letter he wrote on October 13th, where he talks about the fact that, they won't find prints because he's got airplane glue, and things. He just uses very strange terminology. Like, why didn't he just say rubber cement? And I think throughout this whole case, he is leaving clues about who he is and about, definitely his occupation. I think males take a very strong stake in their identity on what they do for a living. And that is just huge through everything that I've seen, not only with Lauren D. Hill, but with the Zodiac case and just what I have to go off of. And all I have to go off of are the letters and clues that he has left. Strikingly, the fact that he cut a patch out of Paul Stein's shirt, I mean, people will think, well, many people, and this is really unlikely, it could be true, but that, police officers and all these people had access to, the chain of command, and all the evidence. And that's why somehow somebody else sent this patch. I don't believe that at all when I look at the background from LD Hill, where he was a rescue pilot in the Navy, in the helicopter. He would have been, and in fact, I found in his records confirmed that he was trained in life-saving tactics, that, he was trained to cut a portion. And I've read other experts that have sent this too, where it could be the patch is telling us that he's identifying, and he planned this to identify Paul Stein by a piece of that shirt. And that's exactly what he did when he sent the letter. And he said, to prove it, here's a piece of his shirt, his bloody shirt. And to me, he would have had that knowledge to be able to do it. And that is way more likely than somebody tainting the chain of command for the evidence when they shouldn't have had access to it, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And yeah. Firstly, I mean, you have to acknowledge the irony of that a little bit. A serial killer suspect who was trained in life-saving, as you just said. I mean, yeah. I think I ever get used to hearing those types of details. But I believe you were making reference to Thomas Henry Horn and the myth of the Zodiac Killer right there. Is that correct?
You know what? I mean, I think it was, yeah, that's one. But I think I've read a lot of people in the community kind of talk about that. Well, it could have been, whether it was on Reddit and, the message boards where people are like, well, it could have been somebody else. And it's like, I really believe that's highly unlikely, obviously. I mean, everybody that sat at that table, I believe it's the San Francisco Chronicle, opened the letter, looked at the bloody shirt. I don't think they believe that it came right from the evidence box, so to speak.
Well, I mean, that's not exactly a widely accepted theory. I mean, Thomas Henry Horn is mostly by himself in that regards about how an active participant provided the Zodiac or the letter writer with the swatch of the shirt. And, there's so many avenues that we could explore, Melissa, because you have not really talked that much about the ciphers yet, other than the Z13. We have these letters that the Zodiac wrote, greeting cards. But I would actually like to take the discussion in a different direction, because you have provided something that I've never heard before from any other Zodiac researcher, and that relates to the fire on the USS Enterprise, and that this fire that led to the deaths of 28 servicemen could have been caused by the Zodiac killer, that there were 28 homicides that took place off the coast of Hawaii, and I have to ask more about that.
Yes. And again, theory, alleged, not proven. However, I find it very strange that there were 28 victims on that ship when later in 1974, when he's feeling comfortable winding down his Zodiac persona, he claims 37 victims when, well before then it was like, his normal number of 10 to 12, 13, not 37. So where did these additional victims come from? I theorize they're from the USS Enterprise. And when we study, Jeff and I were looking at that Halloween card and looking at, is this Halloween card potentially, a confession letter to what happened on the USS Enterprise? And a lot of things have jumped out at us to maybe point to that. I've read the JAG report on the incident that happened on the USS Enterprise on January 13th, 1969. It does state, 6 names of who were close to the 2 planes that were ignited that day. LD Hill is not listed or named in this report whatsoever. However, did he have access to the MD-3A unit that was responsible for being next to this plane that cooked off that Zuni bomb that ignited that day? Did he have access? Those are questions that are still unanswered, but it's still beyond a coincidence, I feel, that there are similarities with that Halloween card that kind of point to what happened at the USS Enterprise that day and point to his identity. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it seems that there is some connection. Now, whether he is just taking responsibility for it, maybe not directly responsible. There are people out there that think that that's what he did with the Sherry Jo Bates case. That's what he did with the Snoozy and Furlong cases. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe he made it look like an accident that day. Maybe he knew the cook-off times were shorter, and maybe he directed so-and-so to start the unit. That we don't know because none of us were there that day. But I can't
ignore. Just a second. Someone here has a question for me. We're recording, by the way. Yeah, we're recording. I'll get that in a second. All right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, somebody was just asking me something, and the joys of video recording. Now, the next thing that I have to ask about is something that you encouraged me to look into, and that is the fire on the USS Forrestal, which occurred before the fire on the USS Enterprise. And they are a little bit similar, but again, because of your either request or suggestion, I've been watching documentaries about these incidents that took place, and people can find the stuff on YouTube for free. Now, please tell us about the fire on the USS Forrestal and how that could have been an inspiration for the fire on the USS Enterprise. Inspiration, I mean more like influence, the idea, and how these 2 events could be connected in some way.
Well, yeah, when I was doing my research into this incident, I found it extremely interesting and strange that it was almost an identical event on the USS Forrestal about 18 months prior. LD Hill was not on the Forrestal. I think our Senator John McCain was on the Forrestal, and I'm not saying John McCain's responsible either. He is not. However, Hill would have known about what happened. He would have been well versed in what happened on the Forrestal for sure. And I was thought and entertained, who knows, but could this potentially been an inspiration? Could it have been a copycat what happened on the Enterprise? The Navy went through such extreme lengths to supposedly retrain their fleet, try and prevent that from ever happening again. And then a short 18 months later, it's almost like a copycat version. I just feel like there's something more to that than meets the eye. Now, when I did obtain Lauren Hill's records, he did attend fire safety school back in 1954 when he first enlisted. So he would have known about fire safety. However, I can't find anything that said that he was retrained in fire safety after the Forrestal event. He specifically, but yeah, I just find it very strange that there's such a similarity between the two events.
Right, and to add a little bit of clarity for people in the audience, you got to help me if I misstate anything. The
Mhm.
fire on the USS Enterprise was caused because a vehicle was parked. It was at 18 inches away from a fighter jet, and that caused an explosion. And that the similarities between the Forrestal and the Enterprise is when there's an explosion on these aircraft carriers, as what happened, that jet fuel just spreads across the deck, across the platforms. And I was just watching a documentary about the Forrestal prior to this recording, and the flames and the jet fuel actually went underneath below decks. And they spread under there, and the only thing to do was to pour seawater via hoses on below deck, and they almost sank the entire aircraft carrier because of it. But how else do you put out a massive fire below deck?
Right.
And I think, though, that, I mean, we have to add an additional layer of clarity. Are you accusing the Zodiac killer directly of causing the fire that killed 28 servicemen? Because it sounds like in your theory, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't just okay, he made a mistake or something and he was responsible for their deaths. It seems like you're saying the Zodiac killer directly planned this, and he had it in his mind because of the fire on the USS Forrestal. He was like, okay, now this is what's going to happen. I'm going to set this chain of events off. And am I right or wrong about that?
I would say that I would say I'm not ruling him out yet. I am still looking at that as an active part of the case in terms of the connection between that event and the Zodiac killing case and him as possibly being the Zodiac. But I find strange is in just recently obtaining his records and looking through his reports, he suffered from chronic back pain. He was put on light duty several times during his service. He, back in 1957, I believe, did request on-shore duty. So he basically got discharged early within like 3 months of when his 4 years were up. So he requested an early discharge and then immediately reenlisted. But when he immediately reenlisted, there were conditions of that it would be onshore duty. I feel like he was having so much fun in the Bay Area that I feel like he wanted to landlock that ship and he didn't want to be deployed anymore. He wanted to be, serve out the remaining portion of his service in the Navy on land. I just feel like that. I cannot prove it, but those would be potential motives as well for him potentially doing what he did. I can't really specify or accuse him without direct physical proof, but I think there are a lot of reasons that point to him potentially being there. Now, the strongest to me, though, is the Halloween card and the aspects of the Halloween card. How, in his hand with the OK sign and the number 14, nobody else has been able to explain what that 14 means. And then the skeleton, where the skeleton arms are in strange positions. Jeff actually discovered the fact that LD, the initials are in the way his arms are formed. And on the card, he says, I can feel it in my bones, how you ache to know my name. And then the next page, he shows his arms are up and he says, but why spoil the fun? Which means he's kind of like taking away or removing his identity on the next page. So he's again showing us bits and pieces. And again, that little symbol, I feel like, you can go to zodiackillerme.com and kind of see some of my posts on comparing that symbol with the image of the USS Enterprise. How come that symbol just comes up all of a sudden? It's kind of strange, isn't it? So, and then with the 13 eyes, he was a member of Squadron VAW-13, the Dragon Squadron. It was an electronic, early warning squadron. And for early warning, I feel like the eyes are on the lookout and showing us he was a part of his identity and what he did on that ship the USS Enterprise when he was part of 2 squadrons on that Enterprise. And that was one of them. So speculation, yes. But I'm not going to say it wasn't him, or that he couldn't be responsible for it. Put it that way.
Okay, and we have been discussing the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card, which was mailed on October 27th of 1970. It was sent to the journalist Paul Avery, who more or less became somewhat of a star of the Zodiac Killer mystery, although it's really hard to call somebody a star in a murder investigation. But this is something that the Zodiac Killer did. It's like other serial killers, such as the Son of Sam and possibly even Jack the Ripper. There's this 3-way relationship. Yes, that's a triangle, by the way. 3-way relationship among the media, the killer, and the police, because the Zodiac is taunting both the media and the police and law enforcement. Now, we've talked about the first 4 crimes that were committed by the Zodiac Killer. But then the Zodiac, as you said, mails in a letter with Paul Stein's bloody shirt, and he is proving that he committed the crime. Somebody asked me this question for the most recent True Crime Talk Radio episode that I did last Tuesday, and they said the Zodiac Killer created a very big presence at Lake Berryessa. And the Zodiac is wearing the hooded costume, as you said. He's got the Zodiac symbol sewn on his chest, not even drawn on, but there's a symbol that's been sewn on. He wrote a message on the car door. He's created this very elaborate plan of saying, all I want's your money. I'm just trying to get to Mexico. I killed a guard in Deer Lodge prison. But why not do that in the letters? Because the Zodiac mails a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt to say, hey, I'm the murderer of the taxi driver, and here's a piece of his bloody shirt to prove it. Why do you think that is? How does that fit in with your suspect? Do you have any idea at all why the Zodiac Killer would not talk more about Lake Berryessa in the letters?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I don't really have anything to add to why he wouldn't have talked more about the stabbing, other than the fact that Brian Hartnell actually survived it, and there's still a survivor. And so I think perhaps that could have been why he just, cut the cord, so to speak, and then moved on to a new MO and a new victim, and just wanted to just wipe that incident on September 27th of Lake Berryessa sort of away from. I think he was very careful to draw attention to himself. So like, even when I said, he revealed this 37 body count, I mean, that wasn't until several years after, right? Why did he do it then? Why didn't he do it earlier? I think he's playing with us a bit when he's revealing certain aspects of his activity. I'm not saying he's lying 100%, but what I am saying is he's sort of masking certain things that aren't as evident. It's not going to be black and white. There probably will be a little bit of gray. Like, how come he waited till 1970 to, let me see, 70, 71. Yeah, 1971 to take on a persona of, the Red Phantom and this citizen and a friend. Like, why?
74.
Was it 74? Thanks.
Oh, you mean like the Red Phantom, Red with Rage, and then the concerns, the citizen from the Badlands card, and of course the citizen.
Right. Why exactly? February 14th, 1974. Why did he wait that long to do that?
Oh, are you asking that as a challenge question, or is that rhetorical?
I mean, obviously, I think that's when he retired from the Navy, and when I think he was I have my own answers, right? I mean, but
please,
I think,
and I want to hear yours.
Yeah.
I want to hear yours. Yes, please continue.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's when he was retiring from the Navy. He had, but the thing is, in my research, is he had left Alameda in 1971. So he had been in Texas from 71 until he wrote those letters in 74. Obviously, we don't have any activity in San Francisco during that time. Again, another strong point that points to my suspect being that person, and that can kind of fill in those holes and those gaps. But what we find in, winding down his military career is, I think he was hanging up the Zodiac persona. He still, I think, has a lot of, multiple personality disorder, whatever you want to call it, mentally, and still wants to toy with the media, the public, and the police, as this is just building his ego because, again, they still haven't been able to catch him. But yet he doesn't want to carry on this Zodiac persona. I think he just hung it up. I think that was, and that's, again, very strong aspect to the Halloween card, the ciphers, that activity in San Francisco, I think, was so tightly connected to his service in the military, USS Enterprise. And here he's moving back into, civilian life, where, and especially that citizen card, which, from what I've, in my research, was the only letter postmarked from Alameda, the actual city that he lived in. And so, again, very strong evidence that it could be L.D. Hill.
Okay, though, I do want to get some clarity. What exactly do you mean when you said the Zodiac killer had multiple personalities? Do you mean that, like, literally, or is that like a metaphor?
Yeah, I mean, metaphor, he could have been. I mean, that's why, we'll talk about that. Why did he switch personas? Why did his handwriting and the style sort of change? Why did the tone, going back to Horan's, the myth of the Zodiac, where he's got linguistics on there that talk about the tone changing. Well, again, it doesn't mean that's three different people. My tone can change 3 different times in one day, depending on who I'm talking to. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Right. So I think these are aspects of his personality that are coming out. Now, whether he has a fractured personality, I'm not a clinician to be able to diagnose that, but there are things going on mentally, obviously, with him that aren't normal, shall we say, like you and I, that are healthy, hopefully.
Well, I mean, maybe you are. I'm a little bit out there, even for my other 2 personalities. But as far as, though, the letters, we've covered some of them, from 60s, 70s, and into 74. But you and I have not talked that much about the ciphers other than the Z13. Now, you have another very unique observation about the Zodiac Killer mystery that I've never heard from anybody else, and it relates to the Z32 cipher. And would you like to share that with us right now?
Yeah, right. So the Z32 is an interesting one. It's the, the Mount Diablo letter. What I guess, and again, it's almost like, the couple that solved the 408, they sat down at the kitchen table, for hours. You had the husband that was really more the analytical, the teacher. You had the wife that was, she was instinctual. She had instinct. She didn't take no for an answer. She was like, a dog with a bone. I'm going to figure this out and not let it go. And that's kind of how I was when I looked at that Z32. I'm looking at it, and, the wife, looking at the 408, she says to her husband, well, what do we know about the killer? And so I sat down and asked myself, well, what do I know about L.D. Hill? What do I know about him that might show that he's evident that he could have wrote these letters or could not have wrote the letters? Maybe it isn't part of what he wrote. But I said, just like she did, well, we know he likes to kill, so let's start looking for double L's, right? So I said, when I looked at the Z32, well, I know he lived and he worked in Alameda, and I'm looking at, what is magnetic north? Where is it in connection to Mount Diablo? I'm looking at, what other researchers have theorized, that some stories, some think, well, Mount Diablo, the magnetic north, when you look at it and tilt it. And I even did kind of the specifications. What was magnetic north in 1970? What was it at this time? Because it will change, right? But some were like, well, he was pointing to the San Francisco police station, and he wanted to bomb the police station. And I'm like, no, I don't necessarily believe that. But when I looked at San Francisco, I saw Alameda was still in that vicinity, in that direction. And when he talks about, inches along the radians, is he talking about the location on the map? When you're looking at it, is it 1, 2, 3 inches along that line from magnetic north that's pointing, right? So like all of these things that I knew, and I knew he lived and worked in Alameda. So I said, well, let me just write down, see if the 32 character is, I live and work in Alameda County, Calif. And that fit the 32 characters. Now that's my theory of what he was talking about. And I feel like in that letter, he was saying, I'm the bomb. There isn't a real bomb, right? I'm the one that's going to blow up. And if you don't find me, I'm going to blow up and I'm going to kill again in the fall. And I feel like that is what he was telling us in the Mount Diablo letter and with that cipher. And he's literally saying, here's where you can find me. And of course, they didn't find him. They didn't find a bomb. Donna Lass disappears in September. And I feel like the timing on that too is, he had three small children at home and 2 teenagers. And he's married to his second wife. I feel like he took the summer off because the kids were out of school, right? And you hear him talking about the school buses, and you kind of hear him talk about a little bit about that in his correspondence. But I feel like that's why he said, if you don't find the bomb, dig it up. I will kill again in the fall. So.
Yes, and that's what I meant. I said about a unique observation that you identify the Zodiac killer as the bomb himself, that he's not referring to a mechanical device, but he's referring to, him as a person, the way that we would say, I'm going to blow up, meaning something, again, in a metaphorical way. And I haven't really quite heard that from another Zodiac researcher, but you did mention Donna Lass, who went missing on September 6th of 1970 in the Lake Tahoe region. She was working in State Line, Nevada, and lived in South Lake Tahoe. But do you believe that the Zodiac killer abducted Donna Lass?
I haven't gotten that far in the case, Ned. I'm working my timeline. And that's toward the end of the activity. He very well could have, been in that area. There is a naval air station in Fallon, Nevada, that literally would have been in the same direction. You would have had to drive through Lake Tahoe to get to that naval base. So and again, we know he was on shore duty at the time, but yet this was also around the time where he was being transferred back to Texas. So he was transferred from, San Francisco back down to Texas Air Base. And so those details are still sketchy for me to really say, whether or not he abducted Donna Lass. I haven't really gotten a point to sit down and look at the card, the Tahoe card, and really dissect it yet. Now, if he really is the Zodiac killer, based on all the research that I've looked at prior to Donna, I would say, and again, that doesn't mean he did Donna Lass just because he's the Zodiac killer. But I have to just say, well, was he capable of it? Yes. But was it a disappearance that he's claiming responsibility for in a card he sent? Possibly. So I have to weigh all these options. But yeah, I'm not sure yet to really answer your question. Hopefully I can get some time to really dig deeper and look at it and focus on it more, especially since I have his military records now.
Okay, though, at this part of the episode, we're nearing the end, and you okay with some challenges to your suspect, Loringdale Hill?
Right. Yes, of course.
Now, you must note that starting a fire on an aircraft carrier that kills 28 people all at once is something that we don't ever see again in the Zodiac killer story. And do you think that that is somewhat different in terms of psychopathology? How does that tie in completely into the thought process of this serial killer who's talking about going on kill rampages, who says that he's going to terrorize school children? If he knew how to create explosions like that, which anyone can, anyone can understand that you put something explosive in one place, it's going to blow up. But where are the markers in the Zodiac killer mystery that point toward a Zodiac that would do something like that? Because as you stated in your theory, intentionally starting a fire that killed 28 people.
Right. He was the master of disguise. He said, I'm going to no longer let you know what I've done. I'm going to now make it look like accidents and robberies and all these other different things. He wanted to operate in the shadows. He did not want to necessarily get caught. He felt like the police were stupid enough not to catch him. So he felt like he could get away with this. I think because he wasn't a civilian, it made this case very difficult for law enforcement to find him. And that's why he went, kind of unmonitored. Now, whether or not the government knows about him and it's classified and this is a cover up, that I don't know. But I do know that the local law enforcement at the time potentially could not have had him on his radar because he wasn't a civilian. He was military, government owned. and operated in the shadows. He still had a family life. He still had a private reputation, with his family back in Ohio. I feel like he really wasn't the type. Yeah, he wanted credit. Yeah, he wanted destruction. Yeah, he had anger. He had vendettas. He was manipulative. I think he would do whatever he could to get what he wanted. But that's where the motive is. The motive is within him. And so it can't just be necessarily mass destruction. I think it has to be something he gets out of it for himself, for him to do things. So.
Next question. You'll notice that there is another big difference in this timeline that you've created. Firstly, it's absolutely astounding and remarkable the way that Loringdale Hill matches up to these zodiac dates. No matter what the end result, if that's a coincidence, it's a horribly shocking coincidence, not only for 69, but also, as you said, the halt in zodiac activity for 72 and 73. But this guy is murdering people prior to becoming the Zodiac. The Lake Herman Road murders, absolutely. The fire on the Enterprise. But then he decides to create a persona and give a name to these killings that he's doing. What do you think is going on with that? Like, why not just commit them in the shadows like most serial killers? What do you think's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. If I were to answer it, I would say, the Zodiac, again, kind of a wink and an eye to what he does for a living. There have been researchers that talked about the Zodiac boats in the Navy, the Zodiac watch being military issued, the fact that the watch, and I think it was Holly Tachi who shared, that ad that she found about the Zodiac watch, how it had a component in it that was electromagnetic in terms of its operation. I thought that was interesting because him being part of, the electrical warfare squadron, there are weird, strange, could be coincidental connections throughout, especially pertaining to his Navy career. And I feel like, when that was just such a huge part of his persona. And it does sound scary in a way, and it was a way to hide his identity. It sounded evil from the depths of darkness, right? Did he have interest in true crime and murders and, potentially the occult? That I'm not sure. Did he have an evil side? He probably did. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I think why he took on that persona, I think, was just, again, to further inject, further, I guess, retract himself from the shadows, right, and into the shadows, and then take on this persona. Was he, what's the word I'm looking for, theatrical? Potentially. I mean, in his enlistment form, it talks about like what he did in his leisure time. And I thought this was interesting. So in 1954, when he enlisted in the Navy, he lists number 1, model airplanes, automobiles and airplanes. So that can corroborate my theory about the airplane glue, when the airplane glue is used when people put together model airplanes. It's, and also the airplane connection to him being, an aviation mechanic and an airman.
I really don't mean to interrupt you, but what do you mean he listed model airplanes and automobiles?
Yeah, so on the enlistment form, there's a question, what are your leisurely activities? And that's what he listed on his leisurely activities.
Oh, wow. Baby shared that with me before. I did not know that. Well, that is amazingly, again,
Yeah.
shocking. The Zodiac Killer, of course, is all about that stuff. And
yeah, so again, another connection. And now that I have it documented, I can talk about that. But then secondly, he lists that he's a singer. He's a tenor, and he's been singing for 6 years. So did he have an interest in entertainment, in theatrics? Was this a way for him to carry out his vendetta, but also in a separate character? Who knows? But yeah, the Zodiac question and why he took on that persona is definitely an interesting question for sure. And who knows if we'll answer it. But those are my takes on it so far.
Okay, excellent. And we are approaching the end of the episode. And as previously stated at the beginning, anybody can support this program by going to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnet88. And if you make a donation or contribution to help the show, you'll get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Right now, I would like to give a shout out to buymeacoffee.com supporter Stephen Walker, who says, "Sorry I'm so tardy with a tip, Ned. Your Zodiac investigation monologues are awesome." And Stephen, don't worry about being tardy. Absolutely no penalties for that. And as you see now, Black Box Online Radio is not only going to be me monologuing, I'm going to have more guests on the program, like Melissa, and also giving some shout outs to Batman66 and River Prawn Pottery. Thank you guys so much for your support. That really means a lot. And I've been discussing the Zodiac Killer case with Melissa Tappa, who is the webmaster of ZodiacKillerBomb.com and runs the Zodiac Killer and Me Facebook group, talking about her suspect, Loring Dale Hill. Melissa, do you have any final send-off for the BBOR audience?
I would just say, look at what I have. Thank you for your patience, because not everything that I have is out there. I'm trying to kind of run this case on my free time, which is minimal. But if there are any questions that you have as you're looking into it, definitely feel free to reach out to me, contact me, or my partner, Jeff Thornton, on the case. We're happy to also, I think, I guess, participate with other experts and share, obviously what we found to try and solve the case. The point is the victims need justice. The point isn't to write a book or to gain notoriety. The point is, let's help actually find somebody that can fit that profile, the MO that is worth looking at, that law enforcement can now say, okay, this is now worth our time to pick this up, open it up again. And then if this one's ruled out, I will be surprised, but he could be. And then that's all we need to know right now. Is he or is he not the Zodiac Killer?
Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ned.